Yeah, it's been almost exactly a year since the idea of doing a podcast came up, and it was yours, Maggie.
It
Um,
was, yeah.
yeah, we were sitting
Gosh,
at a
it's a big.
restaurant with the PLA alumni. You shared it was on your mind. I was like, oh my goodness, I've been thinking about this as well. And now here we are a year later having a conversation on a podcast.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that a year has gone by since that conversation. And now I get to be a fan of your podcast. I listen to it all the time. It's great to watch what you both are building, and the conversations are just so interesting.
You're very kind. And this one I'm counting on will be interesting and useful, hopefully, to our listeners who we think are largely mid to senior level HR leaders. And that's something I've always respected about your work and your passions, Maggie, in terms of mentoring earlier career HR leaders. I know you do a lot of that. It's on the side now, but maybe it will become, a future pursuit as you think about the next chapter of your career. And, just thank you for your generosity and the ideas and for the HR community in general. Would you be willing to share for our listeners just a little bit more about your own professional background?
Happy to share my story. And I love having those mentoring conversations. I always get so much more back than I feel like I'm giving in that. So when people talk about, it's so generous to you to spend your time doing that, I'm better out of every conversation I have. So I'm thrilled to, set aside time to do that. And people were very generous with me early in my career. I always say I'm a business person who happens to do HR for a living. I've been in and out of HR for more than 30 years now. Much of that time has been spent in either education or healthcare related. I started, like many of us do, I started in a recruiting position and then worked my way through different parts of the HR business. I would say that my career accelerated when I joined a startup in 2010. I'd been running an HR department, and then I joined the startup. We had just closed Series C. There were less than 100 people, and I came in to start the HR department, to found it. And I stayed with that company for over a decade, longest I'd ever been anywhere, went through a couple more rounds of funding, was there when the company went public. By the time I left, we were a global organization with $1 billion in revenue, 5,000 people. And I had spent 8 years of that decade actually out in the business doing account management and sales in a lot of ways. And then I came back in when we were a public company to be the CHRO. After that, I was really exhausted. So I did take a couple of years where I was doing consulting and fractional work and focused on my startup advising. And then 3 years ago, I took an interim role at Learn Behavioral, which is an autism services company. And I've been here for 3 years. Didn't think I was coming here for 3 years, thought I was doing an interim role for a little while, but I fell in love with the mission of the company and the team. But I've still managed to carve out enough time to continue to do startup advising and to continue to do mentoring. And I carve out time every single week on my calendar to have conversations with people who are at some other stage in their career, who are just looking for somebody to bounce some ideas off of. So that's me.
For our audience who's getting access to you for the first time, in many cases, what's something that they would do differently if they had your experiences and insights at their fingertips?
Love this question. And I said it a little bit at the top. I think of myself as a business person who happens to do HR for a living. And particularly within our function, it's really important to be able to see the whole chessboard of the business and understand how all the pieces move. It's actually the one function where you have to understand everybody else's work as well as you understand your own, and what makes the business move, and how do you generate revenue and what's important to the customers. So that's my advice. See HR through the lens of the business. Don't see the business through the lens of HR. And it took me a few years, too many, to learn that. But once I did, it really unlocked seats at the table and conversations that people brought me into that I didn't even realize I was missing out on.
As I look at your background, that's something that you've clearly done. You've bounced from HR into the business, back into HR, back into the business, again in HR. And those moves today, looking at your LinkedIn profile, look like they were very strategic, very intentional, that set you up for the successes that you've had. But you've also shared with us the phrase, a careen, not a career. That resonates. I love the consonants and alliteration of that. Could you share how those bounces, that careening, ended up taking place, and help our audience understand how this might relate to their careers that they're trying to grow? over time?
Absolutely. I never had, and I don't believe in 5-year plans. I dread the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Always did. I have always approached every opportunity with, am I going to learn? Does it scare me a little bit? Is there opportunity to grow? Are these people I want to work with? And so while it looks intentional on a piece of paper or on a LinkedIn profile, it was more, I was headed in one direction and then I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to go over there for a little while. Or people would come to me with opportunities, and sometimes they weren't even looking to me as the potential person, but they would say, hey, there's this opportunity out there. And I would throw my hat in the ring if it checked one of those boxes, but never with the idea of, is this moving me closer to a career goal? If you had asked me 10 years ago, or maybe I guess it's got to be longer than 10 years ago now, would I ever be a CHRO of a company the size that I'm at now or was at before? It was never on my list because nothing was really on my list. So that's why I find myself kind of careening from one thing to the next. I do think for me personally, the most important item in my list is, does this scare me? Just a little bit. Because I believe that's the voice in your head that is telling you there's an opportunity to learn and grow here. If it feels like I could do this again, I know exactly how to do this, I could do this in my sleep, I'm not interested in doing those kinds of things. So if you want to have careers that give you lots of different opportunities, you need to be nervous a lot in a role and feel like you're out of your depth for at least the first 6 months of every job. So that's why when I get an opportunity, I ask myself, how much does this scare me?
Is there a way to calibrate on that? Like, what's the difference between a little scared and a lot scared? And is that important?
Oh, I think it is important because a lot scared, I translate into stress. A little scared is exciting. So if it's just scary enough that it's thrilling, then I would go for it. It's kind of actually probably how I would approach a roller coaster ride. If the drop looks like it's going to be, woo, that's exciting, I'll get on that roller coaster. If it's too deep, no thanks, not for me.
One question that I'm just thinking of now, of bouncing between HR and the business and going back and forth, how did you open the door to even be considered for one side or the other? Because I feel like someone might be listening to this podcast and be like, oh, that's a great idea. You know, I'm in HR, I might want to go get a job in the business. How did you have some of those opportunities come about? Is it something you did, or did people just say, oh, Maggie, you're doing such great things, come over to the business?
Yeah, you only need the first one because as anything in your career, when you do it the first time, now you're somebody who does that thing. So I didn't need to open up the door for HR roles because I started my corporate career in HR. I actually started my career thinking I was going to be a social worker and then got a job as a recruiter. When I realized that I was on my way to being a terrible social worker, I worked in a psychiatric hospital and knew very quickly I was in the wrong place. So that was easier because once I had a job in human resources, you get labeled pretty quickly as a human resources person. The way I was able to get into an operating role was I was in this startup. We were starting this project that was very different than anything else we had done in the business. And we had been recruiting for somebody to run the operations and had not found the right person. And I went to our CEO and I said, you know what? I think I could do that job. And he was like, do you really? I said, yeah, I think I can do that job. And I explained all the reasons. I was like, I've been recruiting for this job for several months. And I wasn't even a talent acquisition person at the time. I was running the HR department. I said, I've spent a ton of time thinking about what the right profile is for this role. I can do it. And he gave me the opportunity. And that led me to a series. People all of a sudden saw me as somebody who was different. But in that conversation, I had to convince him that I don't believe that there's HR and the business. It's actually one of the only functions where we say that, right? Nobody in finance says, I'm in finance, that's the business. I'm in marketing, that's the business. So what I was translating for him were all the skills that I had developed in my career that were applicable to this position. And once I was successful doing that, and I love to tell you that story because that's a sort of interesting one, whether or not that was successful, that just opened up the doors. When I wanted to go back into the HR function, ironically, I had to convince them. The same CEO asked me to come back to be the CHRO, but I had to convince other people that I hadn't drifted so far from the function that I actually still had the expertise to come back in. So it's, speak up. The worst they can say is no.
I'd actually love to go there. Like you offered to walk through that conversation about like how you convinced the CEO that you had the skills necessary to be successful in an operating role. Would you be willing to share a little bit more context about that?
I'd been there from when the company was smaller, and I talked about, here are the things that we were launching with potentially a new product.
Okay.
And I said, here's what I understand. This is how we're going to make money. This is how we're going to leverage the partners. This is why this is an expansion. It feels like a totally new product, but here are the things we know today from what we've done before that's going to help us be successful. And here are the problems we need to solve. And by explaining to him that I actually understood what we were trying to accomplish with this new product, this new area of the business, and the ways in which, I came in and I built an entire department for you when you didn't know what this function needed to look like. You didn't know how performance management had to work within this organization. But I translated for him, this is where my vision of where I think this product could go. These are all the levers. Here's where the margins are going to be compressed. Here's where I think there's opportunity. Here where I think we can get efficiencies. This is what I think it's going to do for us as a brand. And being able to speak that language with him in the same way that we had been interviewing other people and looking for this. That's why I was able to convince him, like, this is what you're looking to hear from a candidate. I'm right here. I've got it all. And he bought into it and he gave me the opportunity.
What I am hearing is your need. This is what you're looking for. Here is the checklist, and here's how I match up with that. Making it about the need rather than about your desire.
Yes. I think I came into that conversation with a lot of confidence that I could do it. And very few of my conversations have ever been about, I'm looking for this next thing as an opportunity for me. Yep. It's always been about, I think I could do this really well and I could deliver for you. Whoever the you was at the time, that's where the doors open.
I wonder if there's any sort of analogy to like, don't ask for a job opportunity because of what it does for you. Like, that. You can keep that on the inside. Make it clear what you can do for your organization if you're in that opportunity.
The other connection to that is the impact that you were going to bring to the organization. It was like, hey, you have a need. I can fill it. And oh, by the way, I'm going to knock it out of the ballpark for you and bring such impact to the organization. Is there something that you would advise or say to them that would help them either build the confidence or explore something to be able to lean into their, whatever the advice is of what should they do if they're not feeling so confident?
This is where you have to have your people around you who are your go-to folks who you say, hey, I'm thinking about throwing my hat in the ring for this. And whether that's a best friend at work or a cheerleader, like I've often talked about sort of your personal board of directors. I know that's a concept that lots of people talk about. And there's somebody on my personal board of directors at any given time who I think of as my pump up person. The person I call and say, hey, I want to go have this conversation. I want to go do this thing. And that person will convince me why I'm so ready for it. Like, here's where I'm doubting and here's where I'm questioning myself. Here's when I'm certain. And she's like, are you kidding? They are going to be so lucky to have you. And you get that person to pump you up. And then you see yourself through their lens and you remember, yeah, I am better than I give myself credit for. And when you're building the conversation about what you can deliver, it's easy to speak from a place of confidence. You got to have that person you can call and say, I need that pump up conversation. Get me excited and remind me how awesome I really am. And once you have that in your life, you're going to be willing to take a leap.
When you built your personal board of directors, do you tell people like, I am putting you on my personal, or I'm looking for like, because I feel like sometimes, especially with mentorship, with roles like this, I feel like early career people, and understandably so, are like, I need to invite them to be my sponsor. I need to invite them to be my mentor. And it feels very formal in the, I have a person in my life and here's a role that gets assigned. How do you look at it and how formal or informal is it?
It's always been very organic for me, both in the people who serve those roles for me and the people I do that for. In fact, I had a conversation earlier this morning. We were talking about an opportunity and I said, who would be great for this? And I gave a name and I sat back and I thought, oh, I sponsor for that person. And it was the first time I thought about myself in that role for that individual. So I do think that happens organically on both sides. But being intentional about when you're missing something, when you're missing one of the seats, while I don't think you formally invite people, you can think about cultivating. At any given time, you should be cultivating a group of people that you think could play that role. Mentors are really important. The sponsor role is the hardest one on your personal board of directors because you can't ask somebody to sponsor for you. They have to have a moment like the one I had earlier today. You have to give them enough information to be able to potentially become a sponsor for you. And you can say, hey, if you hear of roles, I would love it if you would think of me when those roles come up. But that's, I think, the trickiest one when it comes to filling that seat. And often you don't even know it's filled because if somebody's sponsoring for you, it's happening in rooms you're not in. So you only know it when an opportunity arises and you realize that that's the person to put you up for it.
Maggie, just for maximum clarity, I'm picking up that there's a subtle difference between mentoring and sponsoring. Could you spell that out for our audience and for me?
Absolutely. So a sponsor specifically is somebody who is in rooms that you're not in and puts you forward for opportunities without you even knowing that it's happening. Carla Harris is one of my favorite speakers and writers, and she says, decisions about your career are often made when you are not in the room. And so that's what the sponsor is for. It's the person who is there saying, you know, so-and-so would be great for that, or here's about an opportunity for growth and make sure that you're in the right conversation, introduces you to the right people. That person has to be within the company you're in or the company you're trying to get into. Your mentor is the person that you can actually be incredibly vulnerable with in a way that you might not want to be with your sponsor at all times. And it doesn't matter where that person sits in your professional life. They can be in your company, they can be outside of your company, and they're really there to help you develop professionally and give you feedback and for you to bounce ideas off of. For me, that's what the difference between those two roles is.
I'm wondering, as you talk through that, how that might relate to some of the work that you're doing, mentoring earlier career HR leaders, helping them find sponsors, helping them think through who their personal board of directors might be. I'm actually also self-reflecting, like, have I ever really had my own board? Or has that been a gap for me?
Yeah.
But would love to hear a little bit more about how you've been able to help other earlier career people be willing to ask for sponsorship, be willing to engage with mentors. And, you know, maybe this, you know, kind of tracks over into networking to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, they're very similar because if you approach a mentoring relationship as I'm going to get something out of this, I want this person to mentor me, and you're not thinking about what you can contribute to them, that relationship goes dry pretty fast. And as I said, you know, whatever I'm mentoring, I always feel like I'm getting something back, often in getting me to think about things in ways that I hadn't before. That's very similar to the way I think about my network. I don't think about my network at all as what I can get out of it. It's all, for me, about what can I put into the people in my network? How can I help them? How can I help them connect with each other? Because I believe in the power of second connections, weak ties. So it's similar in that way. When I'm talking to somebody who's early in their career and they're trying to figure out, can they fill the seats, the mentoring seats? I always say to them, have lots of contact with many different people. I think the magic number for an ask is, can I take 20 minutes on your calendar? 20 minutes rather than 15 isn't enough to accomplish anything. 30 feels like a big ask. People will give you 20 minutes. For some reason, that's a magic number. Because it's probably because there's enough time before their next meeting where they can get a glass of water, take a quick break. So they're like, oh, this is sort of the perfect amount. So start with a series of 20-minute conversations, see who you click with, and try once a quarter, see if you can grab another 20 minutes with that person. And in between those times, think about the ways you can help them solve problems. Not unlike the conversation I had with that CEO. What are they trying to accomplish at work? And is there information or someone you can connect them with? That builds the mentor relationship. The sponsor one is a little trickier, as I said before. Sometimes mentors become sponsors. If you have mentors within the company, they sometimes get into the position that you need them to be in to be a sponsor. When people say to me, like, that's the thing I can't crack, I can't find the sponsor, I go back to that same advice. Look at the people that you believe are in the room you're not in. Figure out what the problems they're trying to solve are. Help them solve those problems. And then simply say, hey, if you hear of any other opportunities where you think I can add a lot of value, I'd love to hear about them. And by saying I want to hear about them, you're not asking them to put you up for something, but now they have this thing in their brain, right? You've seeded this idea, oh, I should be looking out for places where this person could add value. And when they hear about them, they don't go to you first. They take the moment in the meeting that they're in, that instant second, and say, you know what? We should talk to Jess about this. I think she could add a lot of value here. That's the ways I tell people to get into those relationships.
It also demonstrates too of how thoughtful you are, how proactive you are, and it gives them so much to talk about too when they are in that position to be able to be a sponsor. Are there any other roles that are in this directory that you would want to highlight?
Absolutely. You need your super connector. And I love to be people's super connector, which is the person who's willing to lend their network to you. The person who seems to know everybody or knows enough people that their second connections know people. I find that particularly important for me because I'm actually a really shy person. So I'll give you an example. When I was getting my MBA, there were these weekends that we would go to that were like summits, and you'd go for a few days. I was in an online program, and I was in the program with somebody else, my friend Nicole. And Nicole, very outgoing, not at all shy. She knew everyone in the program. And so we would go to these events together, and she would just introduce me to people. And once I was in the conversation, I was fine, but she was my super connector. And now I've tried to build up my own network so that I can do the same for other people. So make sure somewhere on your board is somebody who knows a lot of other people and is willing to share those connections with you. And most people are.
How did you transform from somebody who's shy into a super connector? Because I imagine, and myself included, I am a naturally shy person. I have gone through this transformation as well. But I would love to hear from you of like, what was your transformation? What was the impetus? How do you get over that shyness?
I don't think you get over it. I made a decision, a very specific decision, that I wasn't going to fight it anymore. I used to go to networking events. You walk into a room, you don't know anybody, and I just, like, my palms were sweating. It was just terrible. And it was my form of torture. And I remember thinking I needed to build my network more. And I think about my network like a financial portfolio. I need a bank account I can draw from immediately when I need it. So I need my checking account. I need a savings account that's a little bit more long-term. So I'm putting connections in there, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to use that money for, but I know I need to set it aside. And then I think about sort of my retirement, which is relationships that I'm just building over time. Those are really long-term. That's something that I may not tap into that person for something for 5 years or more, or I may be tapping into that person, not for me, but for somebody else. I thought, okay, I want to think about this and who are the people that I'm connected with? And then I began to think about what am I really good at and what lights me up? And that's what led me to, I love helping people think through their careers, talk about their careers, and connecting them to new opportunities. And so I started going into these networking events and relationships. And, actually it's how Andrew and I developed a friendship over time. I came to you and said, like, I'd love to help out with PLA. And so I spent several years focused just on that, and then realized how much fun I was having doing it. So I had this sort of super connector opportunity. And I said to my brother-in-law, I was on my way to a networking event, and I said to him, I really hate going to these things. And he looked at me and said, no, you don't. You love going to these things. And I thought, you're right. Because now I'm going being who I am. I'm not getting past the shy person. She's still here. I still need a break when my social battery gets really low. But I tapped into what are the things that light me up, and how can I use that as the way I approach networking?
We know that particularly HR leaders earlier in their career tend to be so focused on the work, tend to be so focused on everyone else, not their own growth, not their own personal board of directors, not really looking up to engage with others, maybe as much as they should. I'd love to, hear your take. Like, as if you're speaking to an earlier career mentee. How do you make the choice to make the time? How do you get over that shyness? Is there some trick? Is there some device? Is there some mindset to like get out of your shell and your work and meet some other people?
My first reaction is, particularly when you're building your network outside of the function, and I think you have to build all of your network needs to be people who do lots of different things. You will be a better HR person when you are constantly talking to people who are not doing what you do for a living. That's how you get all the information about how businesses really run. So if you think about that as part of your professional development, I want to talk to marketing people. I want to talk to, and even HR people in other companies, right? So I spent a ton of time in education, but talking to HR people who were in manufacturing, who were in creative businesses, who were in healthcare, broadened my view of what I did as a function. So thinking about that network partially as like, I need to get better at what I do. And how do I get better at what I do? I talk to lots of other people. Time is the one thing you can't make time. You can't buy more. Every year I have a word of the year. And every few years, the word of the year is time. That happens to be 2026 is another year where I'm thinking about time. Time is the greatest gift that you have. And it is precious, and think about where you spend it. And when people tell me, I don't have time for this, I say, you've got to dedicate time. Don't make time, don't find time, dedicate time. Years ago, a friend of mine gave me a piece of advice. She set a one-on-one with herself every week, an hour. And she said, one-on-ones are important. You don't cancel them, including the one for yourself. So set aside an hour that is your one-on-one. And 1 week out of the month, you just want to get started, 1 week out of the month, have that be one of the times where you say to somebody, can I get 20 minutes on your calendar? And you start with little pieces. And I'll tell you, once you start doing it, you hunger for it. And I no longer have to make time or find time. I get really annoyed when something interrupts the time that I've said I'm going to dedicate to that. Start with little chunks to build the habit. And you have to ask lots of people. By the way, the 20-minute thing is, I think it's a magical number, but you may have to ask 6 people before you get one person to say yes. Just keep at it.
Your anecdotes make me think of a mentor relationship I had early in my career. One of my first ever bosses, Audra Branstad at Cummins Engine at the time in the 90s. She went on to have a very long career at Apple, successful, led L&D for a big chunk of Apple. She once told me early in my career, make sure that you have 3 or 4 people that want to hire you at any time. It will change the way that you approach the work.
Oh, that's great advice.
So it's not necessarily like go interview for every job all the time, although I probably did a lot of that early in my career, did a lot of interviewing just to test the waters and try to move fast. But that was about relationships. And I think it was also about security in the work that we do, which can be, the work that we do can be sensitive. It can feel scary to challenge a leader or to give advice to a very senior leader, especially in a founder-led environment.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think people should do early in their career, and my Aunt Sally gave me this advice. She was an HR person at GE, amongst other places. She told me, find a skill that is highly valued and very rare, and make sure everybody knows that you have that skill. And her advice was specialize in difficult conversations, because very few people are good at it, and it's highly valued. And in founder conversations, I've certainly had, when you can be the person that senior people, and particularly founders, but any senior people know that you're willing to have a hard conversation with them. And it's coming from a place of, I know that you need to hear this and nobody else is going to tell you, but I think this could make you better. When they realize that you're willing to do that, and if you have a bunch of people in your life who see you that way and see you as being specialized in difficult conversations, you can print money with that skill set.
Jess and I were talking about this earlier today, how like some people, maybe us, are at a point in our career, in our lives where we can say like, I'll have that tough discussion. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. I've got other contacts, I've got other economic resources. Like, I'm not going to go out of business if that doesn't work out. But early in your career, that feels particularly scary, where you need the job, you need to pay the bills, you can't deal with a disruption in your resume. And I'm wondering, again, maybe to an early career mentee that you might be speaking to, like, how do you get over that hump of being willing to have those tough discussions enough to get good at it?
Yeah. And this is another Aunt Sally tip. She said, when you start those kinds of conversations, when you're initially having them, start by disarming the other person. Like, don't allow them to have the bad reaction. And her advice was, go to the person and say, there's something I've been thinking about talking to you about. And it's coming from a place because I care about you and your success. But I've been nervous to talk to you about it because it's going to be a tough conversation. But I think you deserve to hear it. And the person sits back and they're like, oh, okay. And they open the door for you, but you've now sort of said to them, you can't have a bad reaction to this. You've kind of disarmed that moment. And the first time I did it, I added, I'm really nervous about saying this. And I got to tell you, if this doesn't go well, I'm never going to come to you again with something like this. And it went okay, but I walked away from the conversation. I still had my job. That person continued to come to me for thoughts and advice. And sometimes would even say, okay, you're the one who's going to tell me the stuff. Nobody else is going to be able to tell me. But by trying to disarm them at first and by admitting, by the way, if this doesn't go well, I'm not doing this again with you. If they want that kind of feedback, it will go well for you. If they don't, that's probably not a person you actually want to have in your life anyway. I would also say you got to pay your bills. There are very few career-ending moments that don't involve breaking the law, in my opinion. Like, you can come back from just about everything. And that's why your network is so important. And to your point, Andrew, like, making sure that there are people who are willing to hire you. Secure that set around you and know going into a hard conversation, I've got my people. If you know who the first person you're going to call coming out of that conversation if it goes badly, that's like your security armor that you've got going in.
And it's such powerful, valuable insight around how to give hard conversations, hard feedback, is set the intention up front. That sentence you added of, if it doesn't go well, I'm probably never coming back to, that's actually very true. I mean, that's true for anybody who tries to say something hard. If like the other person reacts badly, we're not going back to them with more hard stuff. They don't want it. So I think in that moment, what I'm getting is you were just speaking some truth up front around kind of the intention and the emotion that was going into it. And that is part of what disarms and allows people to kind of be open and more receptive to the hard things. You've also mentioned that there's power in second degree connections. Can you explain, what is a second degree connection and how do you intentionally build that part of your network?
Right. So a second degree connections, also people call them weak ties. So they're the people that you have a close relationship with, a close connection with. Then there are the people they have a close connection with that you have very little, if any, connection with. So I think about cultivating a large enough network, but built on who are my close connections? Who are the people that I am making sure that I'm checking in with at least quarterly, even if it's just an email to go along with. And when you focus there, they start introducing you to other people. By the way, when people have an introductory conversation with me, one of the things I always say to them is, before we finish, ask me about 2 people that I think you should connect with, and I will connect you with 2 people before this conversation is over. So try to be a multiplier for yourself. But that's what I mean when I say those weak or those second connections are focus on your core network and know that the power is who can they tap into and who in their network can you contribute something to.
And for keeping up with your core network, how structured are you? You mentioned maybe an email quarterly. How organic or structured are we in this keeping up with the core network?
I am probably more structured than a person should be. So take that as I'm about to tell you what I do. So I've got a Notion CRM that I built that has a list of probably 100 people and, who they are in my life. And it's got a formula in it that I enter every time I have a conversation with them. And if I don't update that date every 90 days, it reminds me in red, you need to reach out to this person. It's time to reach out. Recently, I got super geeky about it and I connected my Notion to my Google Calendar with Zapier, and I now get reminders on my calendar of anybody I haven't reached out to in 90 days. What I will never outsource or automate is what does that connection look like? I never have somebody else write the email. I don't use AI to write those emails. It's often an email outreach, just like, hey, checking in. Can we get some time on the calendar? But most of it, there's probably 30 to 40 who I'm more organically connecting with. Like that number never turns red for me for that group of people, because there's always some reason where I'm interacting with them on LinkedIn, or I see an article that I send them, or I just think of them and send them a note like, hey, for some reason you came into my mind this week, hope all is well, kind of thing. So it's like any other muscle that you build over time, but I've got this structure behind it. I do find that occasionally, if you don't have a structure, there are people who will fall out of your life if you're not making sure that you're connecting with them on a regular basis.
I'm smiling because I think this is what you're uncovering is to be a super connector, there needs to be some intentionality about it. And you had mentioned earlier this importance of time. I always talk about time is your priorities. Your priorities are time. And if you really want to put a prioritization around being a connector and a super connector at that, having some sort of support for that makes a lot of sense to me, that you are being very intentional about it. I think one of the themes that I'm seeing come through, as what Andrew and I have talked about in the past, is like, how do you make the implicit explicit? And so whether it's having a hard conversation, making it explicit of here's my intention and here are the emotions that are around it, or with connecting and networking, how do we make this implicit, what seems organic, hey, just want to catch up with you. There's an explicit intention with your Notion structure and connecting it to Zapier. I mean, why not use the tools to help support the things that are important in our life? I loved what you said up front about mentoring and giving back. And oftentimes you're learning more from the people that you mentor. What types of things have you learned from those folks?
You know, whenever I have one of those conversations, I realize that they're asking me questions that I've stopped asking myself. And so often it is the question I hadn't thought of. Like even this conversation, why did you do that? And why did you make that choice? And tell me that story. I definitely think that's true. Everything I learned about social media, I learned from a woman named Sarah Hermelin, who that was almost a reverse mentoring relationship. I was mentoring her a little bit, but she taught me everything I knew. So I do think like new technologies, I'm learning from people I mentor. And then the other thing is we all have our own lived experience. I intentionally think about the people I mentor and diversity. You know, I look at who am I spending time with and am I giving back enough to diversity on all of its dimensions. I think that's really important. We all have to do our own work about understanding other people's lived experiences, and mentoring is one of the ways I do that.
Maggie, I would love to share with our listeners a few of the golden nuggets that we try to leave everyone with that is a guest on this podcast. One is learning resources. People Leader Accelerator really believes in learning and growth through learning, and would love to have you share with our listeners what 1, 2, maybe 3 resources might you recommend to them to help them grow their careers?
Sure. So if you're at all trying to learn anything in the AI and automation space, there's a guy named Jules White from Vanderbilt University who has courses on Coursera, and they're fantastic. Everything he puts out, I take a course. There's a book, this is particularly for women, but I think it's good for anybody, called Likeable Badass by a former MBA professor of mine, Allison Fragel. I'm a huge Likeable Badass fan. I would say those are my top 2 that I've got on my mind these days.
Next accelerator round question, advice, career advice for mid-level, earlier career HR professionals. What one sentence of advice might you leave our listeners with about how to accelerate their careers?
Talk to lots of people. Have conversations.
And in the vein of what you had mentioned earlier of asking for connections to others, who are 1 to 2 people you would recommend that we invite onto the podcast next?
Nicole Thompson Hirsch who used to work for me, and she was my super connector in the MBA program. She's in talent acquisition and people ops at Lattice. Definitely have her. And then somebody who's not an HR person, but is an operator who I met in the startup world, Monica Ladowicki-Rabin. I think you should definitely talk to Monica about building companies and what it's like to be in a startup and all that. I think she'd have a lot to share.
And last but not least, how can our listeners connect with you?
LinkedIn. Drop me a note, say you heard me on the podcast, or if you know somebody who knows me, and ask me for 20 minutes.
Love it. Maggie, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your learnings and the advice from Aunt Sally as well. Really appreciate you joining us. And again, serving as a mentor to many of our listeners through this appearance. Thank you.
What a great conversation. I had a ton of fun. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Thank you.